Welcome to the Good Grind Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois. And we've got a great show for you today. We are delving into houseplants, but not just any houseplant, the plant of the year, according to the National Garden Bureau, the Monsteras. And you know, I'm not doing this by myself. I am joined, as always, every single week by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. Should be interesting. Have you spent thousands of dollars on one of these?
I have not. I think I missed the boat on this one here. Boy, if only I had that crystal ball that would show me that these plants were going to be so valuable. Maybe I would have done something different with, going from an undergraduate. I would have just gotten right into houseplant sales.
Yeah, I think fortunately now that the craze has died down a little bit after the pandemic, they're a little more
Mhm.
affordable than they once were.
Uh,
Monstera.
that is true. Yes. So I'm curious, Ken. I mean, I don't have much experience with Monstera. I've never owned one, and they're can be rather large, but we'll talk about that. What do you have any experience? Do you have any memories of Monstera in your past?
Um, I bought one in anticipation of the show a month or two ago, and I'm not doing a good job with it. It's not looking very happy, but I don't have our house is not that great for houseplants. Our south facing windows are kind of small, not very wide. Um, so we don't have very good places to put houseplants that need a lot of light.
Mhm. Well, yes, we will dive into care and maybe the what not to do, as Ken would say here, in terms of care of the Monstera. But yeah, I can't really pull from much. So we did a lot of reading before the show. My memories of Monstera stem mainly from like shopping mall atriums with the fountains and all the house plants of shopping malls. Which to all the younglings out there, before there was online shopping, we used to have to go in person and these businesses spent lots of money on having really pretty indoor uh, plant plant displays. So, yeah, I feel like there's that's what I'm pulling from. Just those. I remember seeing monsteras as a young child, and always thinking that's a cool looking plant. That's about all I got in terms of actually being in the presence of one.
Yeah, I remember the plants in the mall, but I guess I never paid close enough attention to really know or even remember what was in there. That or my memory is fading. One of the two, or
It's
both.
fading for all of us, Ken. You're
I didn't
not
pay
the only
attention and
one.
it's fading.
No. Well, these plants, they just, to me, it reminds me of. I feel like I've seen these in old movies from the 70s and the 60s. I want to be like, oh yeah, I saw that plant in the movie Logan's Run or something. Way back when. I just feel like these are like old fashioned plants to me. Like I feel like I saw them long time ago in a grainy colored photograph.
Yeah, well, they've been I guess, in the plant trade, at least in like botanic gardens in Europe for a couple hundred years, probably.
hmm
So,
So I guess if we maybe should probably learn a little bit more about the background or the history of this plant. Because I know there was definitely confusion with it when it first was discovered and then brought into kind of the taxonomic world of how we classify plants. So can you tell me a little bit about the history of good old Monstera? And we're talking about multiple plants here too, like a genus of plants.
yes. Yes. So let me find my article here. So this is coming from So this is a revision of Monstera. So this is like a taxonomic paper from 1977, but it gives a little bit of the history of the plant. So it was first appeared in Western literature in 1693. So that's when it was first described by French botanist Charles Plumier. And he was talking about the vegetation of Martinique, and he called what we now know as Monstera um, Arum Heteroseum amplis folius perforatus. I guess before we get into the binomial nomenclature. So
Hmm.
we've got like five different names there. And that then morphed into Linnaeus when he was doing his classification, uh, Dracnodium. And it's just kind of bounced all over the place. In 1763 was the first time Monstera was used for the name by someone named Adanson. And Monstera adansonii, which we'll talk about later, is actually named after him. Some of these were named split, described as philodendron, and they've been taken in and out of all kinds of different things. And there was a newer classification that just came out last year. And I didn't stop and count how many species they have in here because it's a 200-page article. Um, but at a lot of places I've seen that like 60 plus species um, of Monstera out there. So it's, people are probably familiar with one or two of the species, but there's a lot of them out there.
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess if we uh, dive more specifically into where do they come from, I mean, from the 1600s, we've at least been able to describe them in literature. But where does this plant hail from in this blue marble of ours?
So I think for the ones that people are going to be growing or Central South America, I think they go to extend out into South America. But kind of our tropical rainforest
Mhm.
type areas, and which most of our houseplants, when we think of a lot of them, are from the tropics, usually um, in the lower canopy. They're not
Mhm.
which is why they do well in indoors because they don't necessarily need that bright full sunlight. They're used to growing on forest floors and things like that, and Monstera is no exception to that.
Yeah. And the way that it grows, I mean, it again, being sort of at that lower canopy level, forest floor level of that rainforest, um, it has roots, but it does a lot more climbing. Like this is more like a vine, more of like an epiphyte, where it will actually climb up trees at the base of that rainforest floor, and so that's one of the things that would stand out to me is sort of those kind of woody structures or root things that it would have at the base of the plant. Now, in a pot, you might just see them at the base of the plant, but if you'd see them in the wild, you would see these Monstera plants sort of clambering up trees like a vine would. I think the thing that really stood out in terms of what this plant looks like are the leaves. And we kind of mentioned that was even the scientific names, the perfolomius or perfilodiatia, or however them Latin people say it, perfilated leaves. Essentially, there's holes in these leaves, and well, with certain species, and but other species within this Monstera genus, they don't have as many holes in the leaves, or if at all, and they do kind of look like a philodendron. So I guess I could kind of see where the very beginning, where these would be kind of put in this group, and then in that family, and then moved around here and there, and then finally, it arriving in the Araceae family. Is that the arum family? Um, and that reminds me of, like, so we have a plant, Arum picatum, which can grow in our forest floors. And, it sort of a similar type of a plant to it in terms of a little bit of the leaves minus the holes, but also the flowering and the fruit that might develop on our arums in our own North American climate. But yeah, these do hail from the South and Central parts of the Americas.
Yeah. So you mentioned the holes in the leaves, and I think when people think Monstera, most people think of the ones with holes. I think it's usually what you find a lot of times on young plants or smaller plants. The newer leaves, youngest leaves are not don't necessarily have holes in them, but as they get bigger, start to climb, they start developing holes.
Mhm.
Or I guess the proper term is fenestration on
Ooh,
those leaves. So
that's fancy.
it's a vocabulary word for this week.
So you were talking about not. necessarily cheap plants. You could probably find them a good deal on a Monstera, but some of these are fairly expensive. And yeah, when you go to the specialty nursery or wherever you go to pick these up, make sure you use that word fenestration. Um, that way they'll know you're serious. Uh,
Yes, be amazed. And if they don't know, maybe you can get a discount
that's
when you
right.
explain it to
Yes.
them.
Yes. Do you know who you're talking to? I am Mr. Fenestration to you. Yes. But yeah. So the holes in the leaves, they maybe serve a purpose. We're not sure.
So there's all kinds of different theories. I went down rabbit holes a lot this week, so probably not as well prepared as I should be because I got lost a lot. But I did find there's a paper. Um, I don't know if this is a peer reviewed paper, but it's kind of here we go. There's the right tab. So this is the adaptive function of leaf fenestrations in Monstera species. They look at water, wind, and herbivory. This is from Tropical Ecology and Conservation at the Monte Verde Institute in Costa Rica. So this person they're looking at. So the some of the theories are they have holes in the leaves, and that will deter herbivores from feeding on them. It helps the holes help water get down through the canopy, so they get down to the roots of the plants, or they're for wind, so that they're not getting wind whipped. The wind can pass through. The I guess the little experiment this person did, they found at least from their experiment, they're thinking it's for water because you think they're in a they're growing in a rainforest. A lot of that water, I think numbers range like 70% plus percent of the water gets intercepted by that upper tree canopy. So while it rains a lot, there's not nearly all of that is getting to the forest floor. So by letting the water go through the holes in the leaves, it's going to pass through and get down to the roots of the plant. Whereas if it's rolling off the leaves, it may get shed far away from the roots of the plant. So that's one theory out there. There's another one um, that it's more about those holes. So again, it's under the canopy. Um, so you've got like dappled light. You're not getting direct light, and those holes help increase the leaf area of the plant without making them giant, so they can intercept more of that dappled light. And if it happens to pass through a hole, there'll be leaves underneath to intercept it. So it's helping them intercept more light by increasing their leaf area without add without having to produce a whole bunch of plant tissues, which is going to be costly. So those are some theories out there. That first one, they didn't find any. I think they've actually found there was more feeding damage on the ones with holes in them, and then there was negligible difference between holes and no holes in the leaves for wind. So
But it does lend well to another very common name for this one. It's called also commonly referred to as the Swiss cheese plant, as I've heard it called many times, and I'm sure if I asked my kids to remember something, they would remember Swiss cheese plant better than
that's it.
Monstera. But Monstera is still kind of a catchy name too. It's a big plant. It can be a big plant, depending on what species. I suppose, generally speaking, when we are dealing with care of Monstera. So, Ken, you talked about you've had this plant for a month or two. Um, you have not taken as good of care of it. What should you be doing to take care of your Monstera plant? Um, and and yeah, give us some tips and advice.
Yeah, so we'll get into the different species. But from what I've read and gathered, the Monstera deliciosa, which is the one we most commonly find, also called split leaf philodendron, is probably one of the more forgiving ones. So it can tolerate a little lower can tolerate lower humidity than others. Monstera, are still are the humidity in our house during the winter is still probably much lower than it really was, which I know is part of my problem. It's developing kind of brown spots on the leaves, and that can be an indication of low humidity, too much water, not enough water. I mean, plants are kind of a pain that way sometimes. Um, but so they're going to like a little like humidity, and some of them need a lot of humidity. Some of the more difficult ones to grow, they need bright light. They don't necessarily need like full sun, but they need like a bright windowsill or supplemental lighting if they really want them to do well. And if you've got leaves that don't have a lot of holes in them, that a lot of times that may be an indication they're not getting enough light um, as well. They do like it probably a little bit more on the moist side, from what I've gathered. So not maybe stick your finger in there if it's dry. You want to water them. You're not letting them completely dry out like you would with succulents and stuff like that. Probably treat them water like your typical house plant. Stick your up to your first knuckle and that dries out. Go ahead and water them and stuff.
See, I like you said, Ken. A lot of our houseplants they come from sort of that forest floor from Central South America, those tropical type climates. Um, Yeah, when you describe light levels, so I have a golden pothos. I propagated this thing in our plant prop class 20 years ago, and I have multiple plants that I propagated off of that. But I've noticed that when it sits in my house all winter long, the leaves turn green. I've even told people like, "Oh no, this is a golden pothos," and it's all green. They say, "Oh no, that's not a golden pothos." So I will pull a cutting off of that very same plant, pot that up, have it outside during the summer, it turns this gold color, white stripes and gold flecks, and it's almost anything but green. And so, yeah, the light levels can play such a huge role in our house plants, and that's something that I kind of struggle with, especially this time of year where you are trying to provide enough humidity to keep your plant growing while still trying to provide light. And that usually means some kind of an artificial light for me. Um, but yeah, so do you have any plans, future plans for your Monstera? Is it going to remain in a pot? Are you going to pot it up with something else? I'm just curious because, I've seen this plant growing in like an atrium up another like ficus tree. Are you going to do anything like that?
And so yeah, a lot of times when they get bigger, people will put them on poles, plant poles that you can
Hmm.
buy, whether like sphagnum or something like that. There's bark, because they do want to climb. So if you want them to do that, you need to provide something for them to climb on. Probably something kind of rough. I was watching a webinar the National Garden Bureau did, and they had somebody talking about somebody had a metal pole and wrapped it in burlap.
Hmm.
You want something that's going to retain some moisture, that humidity, so the roots are going to go in. You don't want it to dry out, so some kind of organic matter like that burlap or sphagnum or something like that that can hold that moisture, and those roots will attach to it. If you want to grow, if you want your plant to get really big, and you don't want it kind of flopping all over the place, you give it something to climb up. So
Hmm.
if I am successful with it, yeah, it will definitely need to go into a bigger pot because it's not in a very big pot right now, and I don't think they really like a lot of root crowding, so you
Hmm.
need to repot. Um, I say frequently, but probably a little more frequently than some other plants, house plants would.
That would be tough if you trained it onto, say, your coffee tree that you're growing as well. So, yeah, repotting both of those would be kind of an ordeal. I guess another thing to mention is that, when we speak about Monstera, we're talking about a toxic plant. So, if you have little nibblers in your house, whether they be kids, adults, because you know me, sometimes I
Pets.
just get hungry. Pets. So this plant does contain calcium oxalate crystals. That is not good for your organs, and so it can cause also in terms of like a skin reaction to pain, swelling, things like that. So um, just protect yourself from this. Um, but it's interesting. Should we dive maybe into a specific species because we talk about edibility, and this one Monstera is deliciosa? Why would it? Why would a plant taxonomist call a poisonous plant deliciosa? So Monstera deliciosa, the most popular one. Ken, am I mistaken here? Is because I wouldn't eat this plant knowing the toxicity of
Okay.
it.
Yes, yeah, for Monstera, all parts of the plant are toxic, but for Deliciosa, it does actually produce an edible fruit, but you have to harvest it at the right time. If you harvest it green, it still has those crystals in it. So Timing of that is important, but if you're growing it as a house plant, I'm not going to say I can guarantee you're not going to get fruit. It's very unlikely you're going to get fruit because you can't kind of replicate the conditions it needs um, to produce that. So I actually found an article in Scientific American from 1894 where they describe the flower and fruit of it. So here's and then in this article, it actually refers to it as philodendron as well. So the first paragraph, the Monstera deliciosa occupies a prominent place among larger plants that are often is seen in the parlor and living rooms, and it is difficult to imagine any foliage decoration that is more beautiful and ornamental than afforded by this plant. For this reason, and because the stately liana requires comparatively little care and attention, it has found many friends and admirers who are richly rewarded by its abundant, luxurious growth for the little trouble they expend upon it. But although this child of the tropics is so well known, very few have had the satisfaction of seeing a blossom or even a picture of a blossom of this plant. And therefore, when by a happy accident had this rare pleasure, I determined to publish a little study of the plant with a good, clear illustration of the flower. And we can include a link to that. But yeah, so eventually it'll produce a fruit. And again, I've never seen it in person or eaten it, but it's got like little almost like scales on the fruit, and when those come off, you can then eat it. But if they're still on there, kind of like honeycomb, little or hexagonal structures on there, then you can eat it. And the taste is supposed to be like a mix of tropical fruits, commonly described as a combination of banana, pineapple, coconut, with maybe some hints of apple or mango. So, but it will cause irritation if it's not fully ripe.
Mhm. So yeah, and this University of Minnesota article also mentions that deliciosa will rarely form flowers or fruit in any environment outside of its natural habitat or a controlled environment greenhouse. So if you're one of them lucky folks that has a greenhouse, uh, yeah, maybe you'll get something off of this. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that Scientific American article was maybe a conservancy or something in Germany
Mhm.
or something like that. Yeah, was not out of somebody's house.
No. And interestingly, so and in the wild, deliciosa will get up to 50 feet tall, but it will not get that big at home. But the Minnesota article also says this plant would be considered aggressive in its native habitat. It can be kind of a bully where it's at. So that must be another reason why it could potentially do so well in our homes because, well, maybe it has a little bit a stronger will to. Not saying plants have wills, but it seems like it might just be a little bit tougher because these leaves are a little bit thicker than say like your typical Easter lily or something like that. They have a little bit more of a waxier cuticle, which helps them to resist some of that drying out that you might experience at home. Even though you just heard us say yes, they do need a higher humidity, but these are a little bit more tougher leaves, a tougher plant.
A little more tolerant of
Yes.
less than ideal conditions than some of the other monstera.
Hmm. Yeah. Now, there are cultivars even within these, and the one that's called out in this article here is Thai constellation. Now they describe it as a showstopper, and it basically when they first introduced this particular cultivar, this was the one where people were paying tons of money for. Um, Now, Thai constellation, I'm guessing, looking at it, says that there's is sports a gorgeous cream and green marbled pattern on its leaves. So it's variegated. It has some leaf coloration to it. Um, but yeah, I guess people were paying what hundreds,
And there's
thousands
I
of
think if
dollars.
I heard of, I don't know if it's true or not, but a mention of people, yeah, a couple $1,000s,
Whew.
like plant auctions and stuff for a single plant.
Oh, when do we get to the propagation section of this podcast? um, how do you make more of these?
Yeah. So I will say that they have figured out how to make more of these, and now the price has come down uh, quite a bit. I mean, I think you can find them in box stores.
Mhm.
No, maybe not
Yes.
in Jacksonville or Macomb, but in bigger cities, you can find, I think, Thai Constellation in box stores and stuff. So
Okay. Well, good to
we've
know.
we've
And
come a long way in a couple of years.
yes, we have. And I guess if people are curious, the main propagation method for these is cuttings. It is air layering, where you actually make a slit in the stem. You can put rooting hormone in that slit, um, which then triggers roots to initiate. Then in that spot, you what I would do is I would mound or wad up sphagnum peat moss where you make that cut, put the rooting hormone, and then you wrap it in some kind of plastic wrap. Give it a few weeks. When you see the roots growing in that that ball of moss or potting soil, you then cut it and pot it up. That's air layering, and then cuttings and division. Those are your propagation methods for those. You can go get rich slow, just like the rest of us.
And I'll say for deliciosa, again, they're not getting 50, 60 feet tall in the wild. But indoors, I don't think it's, if you're taking good care of it and you've had it for a while, you can probably get 4, 5, 6 feet tall. I think that's out of the realms of possibility.
Yeah. Well, I guess a deliciosa is going to be your most common one. But what about that first one, the one that was the first Swiss cheese plant, Monstera adansonii, named after the very botanist that came up with the Monstera name. So this one, even though it was one of the first ones described, it is not probably the most common one that you would find in the trade. That again would be deliciosa. Um, it's not even it grows quickly, but it's still not even as big. Where deliciosa gets up to 50 foot in the wild, this one's only going to get to like 13 foot in the wild. Um, and then if you're growing this in your house, it's going to get 2 to 4, maybe 5 foot tall if you're lucky. Um, the leaves of this one, as they emerge, they will be kind of an oval shape, but then they're going to take on more of that typical heart shape flavor of monstera or some philodendrons and things. So um, but these will have a couple holes in each leaf, range about five ish in each leaf. So you are going to have that Swiss cheese effect. But yeah, adansonii, that it is the first one, but not the most popular one, I guess, out there.
Yeah, I think the other one I have that's what I've got too. I think the other one is an Addisonii. It's, at least it looks like it is, but yeah, it's definitely smaller. Yeah, and this one's actually vining um, a little bit. At least last I looked at it. Hopefully, it's still alive. Yeah, but yeah, definitely smaller than the Deliciosa.
So this next one, and I said, Ken, we were saying like which ones do we include because we have dozens and dozens of these. I just said, Ken, leave this on here because I just like it. Um, I'm not going to use the actual name. I'm going to use the synonym here, Monstera esqueleto. I like that, which Ken told me is skeleton in Spanish. I like that esqueleto.
Yeah, so this one is one where I guess the taxonomy is confused. Maybe it's a hybrid, maybe it's some species. So I found something, um, Monstera affinis epipremnoides. So affinis means similar to, or so maybe it's that, maybe it's something different, but everybody calls it Monstera esqueleto. And this one has got pretty big holes in the leaves, the fenestrations. So that's the name skeleton. So it's got much bigger holes than like a deliciosa does. A little, I guess you could say a little more delicate looking, just because of those large holes, much more um, lacy. But it's still, again, I've never grown it before I wrote it. It's just still pretty tough, relatively easy to grow um, plant though, and I think it's not as common. And it's probably gonna be maybe a little more expensive than your typical monstera, at least until the supply catches up with the demand for it.
Well, I'm looking at a picture of it right now, and it's on a storefront, and it is probably one of the more striking ones on the storefront. and the most expensive one on the storefront. Um, and so, yeah, I think that would make sense. The description here that we have in our notes is that there is more air than plant, which I think is a really good way to describe it. Yeah, these fenestrations are just it does scream skeleton to me. And so esqueleto is very befitting of this particular plant. Yeah, very striking. This is one I would like to have.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint to any of my wife listening, which she
Or kids.
doesn't. So yeah, no, no, the kids they don't even know dad goes to work and does anything. So yeah. Oh, but there is one particular species that even has more air than plant. Um, and this is Monstera obliqua. And this is the one where I feel like this is where like the supervillain would own these, you know? And if you have one of these, you are not a supervillain. But this is like a rare plant. This is one that would be very difficult to get your hands on. So this is for plant collectors essentially. And even plant collectors have to keep their eyes peeled for this particular one. Monstera obliqua is one of the rarest species out there. Um, and it probably one of the reasons why it is more rare is because it's more difficult to propagate because it's very slow grower. Yeah, it must just creep along. And so propagating this plant, making more of them, is just a more detailed, longer process. Um, it also is a very finicky plant, and it needs a very high humidity, at least 85%, because this plant um, would probably acquire more moisture from its leaves than its actual root system. So it's definitely acting more kind of like that epiphytic type habit of this plant, and so needs a very high humidity, so it has a very specific growing environment that requires more than likely a very climate controlled greenhouse. Um, and but yes, this one is described as more holes than leaves, uh, making it a delicate addition to any plant collection. Um, and I do not see a picture here. I've looked at a few stores, and they don't have this. I
Yeah, I just did
bet.
a general search for it, and it looks the pictures I saw, it looks almost ragged. And like there's so many holes, and the holes are so big. It looks kind of like a caterpillar came through and just skeletonized it, or something like that. I mean, it's not rough edges, but it's yeah. We'll have to see if we can find a picture to put in the video
Yeah.
version of this. But if we can't, use a search engine of your choice and search Monstera obliqua,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's yeah. It may be another one to be interesting to grow, but I don't know if I want to provide 85% ish humidity in my house.
Uh, you have a lot of mold growing in my house. That's all I can say. It's like,
Have to have a
um,
grow tent or something like that.
yes, yeah, it would be a mess. So, and if I would spend probably the hundreds, if not maybe $1,000 or so on this plant, I do not want to hide it in a grow tent. I want this to be. I will build my house around it.
Yes. Nor do I want to explain why I spent that much money on a plant.
That's true. No, maybe I should hide it. That's all right. I've spent lots of money on plants that I've killed, so we won't get into that right now. So we had the plant collector Monstera obliqua, which again, hey, anyone's allowed to send us cuttings of whatever, so long as you're following all rules and regulations of the U.S. government. Anyway, so there are other Monsters out there, and this particular one, just briefly speaking, this is the largest Monstera out there. It's Monstera epipremnoides. Oh boy, this is going to be a rough one. Epipremnoides. Epipremnoides. Um, yes. So again, one of the larger ones out there. It grows very tall. I'm guessing very viney. The leaves are very large than most of the other ones that we've discussed. The leaves, the way they act, they kind of drape over top of each other, which kind of I think gives sort of that tiered layered look to it. Probably a bit more softer appearance than some of the skeletonized looking leaves. But yeah, so epipremnoides is the largest one out there. So I'm guessing if you're growing this one, you need some space.
Yeah. I guess we should preface with like largest one out there or the rarest, like in the plant trade. Yeah, I don't know if
Yep,
like the whole genus, these wouldn't necessarily like the obliqua would be the rarest, and the other one, epipremnoides, whatever it
good
is,
point.
would be the
Yes,
biggest. At least in those available on the plant trade of the 60, 70, however many species there are out there.
yes. In our limited view of this plant, which is how can you buy it? Yeah. Mhm.
All right. So there's two at least we were able to find for from looking at different sources and different store or I guess storefronts, if you will, that do not have any holes or fenestrations in them. So one is called Monstera Peru or Monstera carstenanum or something like that. Um, so this is a smaller one. It doesn't have any again those holes or those fenestrations on them, um, and they've kind of got leathery, kind of dark and light green patches. It's kind of variegated like that. The pictures I've seen, it kind of think of like looking at like a map of like farmland, and you have these different shades of green on it, kind of that patchwork on there. To me, it looks kind of similar to that.
That's a good description. I've never thought to describe that. Yeah, that patchwork of like looking at a map of agricultural land, because that's exactly what I'm looking at one of those the variegated type here, and yeah, good job, Ken. Good description, because that's exactly what I'm looking at. It's like a map of rural Illinois right here.
It's my contribution for the day.
Wait, great job. You should write that one down because someone's going to take it.
It's recorded.
Ah, yeah.
And then the last one, should have cut these out with these names. Monstera Standal Standleyana, Elbow Variegata, or Cobra Monstera. We'll go with Cobra Monstera.
I like
Uh,
that.
so this one, if you look at the petioles, it's kind of got a sheath, a wider sheath on there that looks kind of like the hood of a cobra. Thus the name Cobra Monstera. And again, this is another one that does not have holes or fenestrations in it. These are a little thinner, a little pointier than some of the other ones, Monstera, that are out there. And there are can be variegated with lighter green and white specks on it as well.
Yeah. It's not quite the patchwork, but there is like, half the leaf might be white, the other half green, but I see more specks, more spots of white on green leaves with this Cobra Monstera. And both of those last two we mentioned, again, they're both smaller um, than the others.
Yes, and you can find them in the trade. The one website I'm looking at, they're the same price as the others,
Hmm.
or a smaller deliciosa. Big, larger deliciosa is more expensive.
Hmm.
They can be found out there in the wild, as in the stores or on the internet.
Yes. So as a national was with the National Garden Bureau's plant of the year, there is a lot more information online about you know monsteras, include the as the broad genus of plants, and then down into specific species and even cultivars of plants, some of which we've highlighted today. But we will put links to the National Garden Bureau's kind of their press packet that they put out about these particular plants if you want to learn more about them and you want to hunt around to go find them.
Yes, and if you really want to go down rabbit holes, we can include the at least the titles of the papers we were referring to. I think some of them are open access and anybody can access them. So
Mhm.
if you got time to kill and you want to read a 200 page paper on the classification of Monstera in Central America. Go for it.
I would almost like to have a time machine to go back in time to be in a room when these botanists are arguing about what Monstera is, because I got to imagine they weren't just like, oh yeah, it's not a philodendron. They were probably like, oh, it is a philodendron. It'd be fun just to know that people were arguing about this sometime in the past, that it was a big deal. Today we're just like, well, let's test the genetics and find out for sure.
Yes. And that comes with its own problems because everything is getting split and lumped together now. And well, I guess
Yes,
problems isn't the right word, but its own set of issues.
that's right. I don't know what an aster is anymore, by the way. So the name changes all the time. I'm over it now. Uh, well, that was a lot of great information about monsteras, all different types. And again, as we mentioned, there'll be more information down below in the show notes. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by Ken Johnson. Ken, thanks for not only editing the podcast, but contributing, as always, a Monstera amount of information for this podcast. So, Ken, thank you very much for doing all this legwork, making me look good.
Well, yes, thank you for, as always, for being on, and I have to go take care of my Monstera now so I can get it nice and big. Maybe I'll go all out and try to get some fruit on it.
Oh,
Build a
all right. Let's build that
structure
greenhouse
in
this year. That's right. Yes. Yes. Good old grow house in the basement.
And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. We're going to be talking about all these plants of the year. How about the herb of the year? We will discuss what that particular one is. I will settle in amongst my Monstera and sip my herb of the year tea, if you might guess what that is now. But yes, we will be back next week to discuss another plant of the year. Well, listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listen. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing. Did I lose you? I see you, Ken.
My headset cut out for a second there. Yeah.
No. Okay.
Okay, I'm back.
Should we start over again?
If you want, it's up to you.
Considering you don't know what we said. Okay. All right. Take two. This is going to be great, especially if you're editing this. And if it did pick up all my sound, you'll be like, oh, man, got to listen to this again. Okay.
This was the best start ever.
All right. Take two. Here we go. We did it. We got through Monstera unscathed. But we did not talk about spadix or spathes or, yes, the beautiful flower that people will probably never see if they grow this plant.
Yes. Or that they're pollinated by beetles.
Aw, sorry. We didn't get to that. Ken's like, the best part of it is that they're pollinated by beetles, which you didn't mention.
Wait, there's more.
Well, that's what the blooper reel's for.
Yes.